Chapter 16, Episode 16, Sacred Rod 1. A night when the very bright moon hid the stars. Sitting under the dark blue night sky, with her angel-like beautiful face, Cordelia spoke. F***ck, F***ck, F***ck. The use of abusive language is subject to sanctions. What is this crazy bastard saying? Yes, this is an exclamation, not a curse. Anyway, decide quickly. Cordelia wasn't the only one sitting under the fantastic moonlight. Deep in the mountains, the two were facing each other at the place where the sound of the valley river's ripples were heard. Cordelia, who was almost about to cry, said as her shoulders drooped. Hey, do we really have to do this? You have to do it, you have to. Cordelia's main scenario was harsh from the start. In order to completely defend and not just hinder the devil's hand's attack on the social gathering, a holy relic, which possesses power that is incompatible with the demons, is needed, the sacred rod Moonlight. Yellow Storm. Why? When Yellow Storm answered lifelessly, Jude coughed once and took a step. He placed his hands over Yellow Storm's shoulders and said with a serious face and voice, Only you can do it, only you can do this. Even if you say it nicely, your nature remains the same. If you don't like it, you can stop. Is this my event? It's your event. The event to get the sacred rod was for Cordelia only. F***ck, I really hate the game crew. It was Cordelia who spit out curses again, but she seemed to have given up resisting because she was in low spirits. Jude let out a sigh full of various emotions and then tapped Cordelia's shoulders again. If you're going to do it, let's get ready. We don't have time. We have to do our best, but we can't miss the event because we missed the timing right. I'd rather die than suffer. Yes, I'll do it. I'll do it very perfectly. Jude, who smiled and gave a thumbs up, took a step back and looked at the night sky again. It was the incident on the road to Langesthay 2 days ago that started all of this. A day after leaving Count Bayer. Their travel schedule was generous in the first place, so the party was not in a hurry. We advanced slowly to let the horses rest, but when we stopped somewhere and rested, Marja and Dahlia went out of the carriage and took a break. It was to get out of the stuffy carriage and breathe some fresh air, but rather, it was to give both Jude and Cordelia some alone time. How should I say, we are very considerate. They're a really good couple, doesn't it make you want to cheer for them? At Dahlia's self-praise, Marja replied with a smile. The hearts of the two were the same. In the first place, the promise to come out and make time for the two whenever the carriage stopped was not something discussed in advance. It naturally happened because of the consideration of the maid and escort, who really thought of their masters. Sitting in the shade of a tree, Dahlia, who took the offered teacup from Marja, continued while laughing, Yufufu. Originally, they were a good-looking man and woman who got along well, but their relationship has suddenly improved since last month. Yes, especially at the daytime runaway, no, after they've had their time alone together. I'm only telling you this, but just before, the young lady was feeling a little hurt, so I was really worried, but I guess it was a good thing now because it could have been worse in the future. Oh my goodness, the young lady too. When Marja blinked as if she was surprised, Dahlia spoke along with an aha exclamation. Come to think of it, even the young master at that time was feeling troubled too. Yes, a little. In fact, Marja was just talking nonsense and making a fuss, but even so, Dahlia is an escort to his fiancée. No, rather, it wasn't something to reveal because she was a person in that position. And it was the same with Dahlia. When Cordelia was feeling hurt a month ago, she did a lot of nonsensical stuff, as well as spilling a storm of curses that surprised all those who were listening. What it was really back then. A pretty lady that looked like a doll was pouring out such vulgar curses out of her mouth. Indeed, it was a sight I would never want to see again. But it worked out really well. The young master's body is getting better, and they're going to the social gathering together. You're right. After looking at each other, the laughing maid and escort gazed at the carriage again. What are the two people inside talking about? Is it my imagination that the two were smiling cutely and exchanging sweet words of love? Hey, be humane and pay properly. Your father gave me this, who do I have to pay? Tien pay, they're talking about the paying system N that I explained in the previous chapter. It's the money my father gave me to buy me something delicious. Yes, I'll properly budget it and buy you something delicious. Both Cordelia and Jude, who had an unsatisfactory conversation about the stuffed money bag that Count Chase gave before the trip, did some stretching exercises. The magical carriage boasted of a comfortable ride, even though it was running on the road, but because they were stuck inside, they were feeling frustrated. But it's better than playing the fiancé role in front of everyone. Even though it was a bit frustrating, it was much easier and better to be alone together like this. Anyway, let's have a productive conversation now. What, like the future schedule? Yes, schedule, especially, what's really going to happen in the future about that. A month after awakening the memories of Outboxer 009. Jude has already confirmed several times that this world is almost the same as Legend of Heroes 2. However, only the elements that make up the world have been confirmed so far. Those that just exist, such as people, terrain, history, and objects. Will the story itself proceed just like the Legend of Heroes 2? Of course, it would have been like the beginning if it were to proceed. If Jude and Cordelia intervene in this and that, the story itself would change due to the butterfly effect. But even so, what's going to happen had a great meaning. First of all, our departure date is almost the same as that of Cordelia in the original. If it goes exactly the same as the game. The bridge at the front of the road we're going on now has collapsed, and the road is blocked. In the original work, there were two options. Take a detour by using the mountain path, or go south to get a boat for the river. In Cordelia's main scenario, it was the first multiple-choice options a player encounter. And most of those who were stagnant water chose the detour route here. That's the only way to get the hidden event. At the time Jude spoke, Cordelia had an unwilling expression. It was because of the contents of the hidden event. But it was then. Young Master, there's an issue I have to report. Would you mind for a moment? A young knight's voice came from outside the carriage. It was a knight named Jun, whom Count Baer assigned as an escort for the trip, and he had made quite a brilliant contribution to the expedition despite it being his first campaign. Yes, I don't mind. Excuse me for a moment. When Jude responded, Jun opened the carriage door. For a moment, he glanced at Jude and Cordelia sitting face to face, before looking back at Jude and continuing his words. There were some people coming back from the road ahead, so I asked them, and they said that the bridge has collapsed and that the road is blocked. It couldn't be helped, but I think we should take a detour. As expected, something happened. Jude glanced back at Cordelia, who frowned and nodded her head. All right, then are we going to take the mountain road? Yes, Mr. Baer is knowledgeable of the nearby geography. Because it was my first trip, I did some studying in advance. Indeed, yes, we're going to take the mountain road as young Master had said. I'm afraid the schedule will be delayed by a day or so, but I think it's the best we can do right now. Let's do that, there's plenty of time in the original schedule, so we can afford not to hurry. Thank you for understanding. When Jude appeared as decent and kind, Jun's face, which was quite stiff at first, was loosened. He seemed to like Jude more now. I look forward to working with you then. Okay, although the road we'll use is off our itinerary, we won't have any problems with the safety of the two of you. Jun, who declared proudly as a knight, bowed again to Jude and Cordelia and closed the carriage door. And immediately after, Jude said to Cordelia, "It's happened." As in the game, the road was blocked and a detour was taken. The significance of this event was quite great, and in local terms, the basic conditions for beginning the hidden event were in place. Cordelia stretched her shoulders and said, "Hey, by the way." "Yeah." In the game, the event automatically occurs when you go to the mountain road and head to a certain area, right? It will occur. But even if we head to a certain area, the event won't occur automatically here, right? Of course it won't occur. Legend of Heroes 2 was a game with a very high degree of freedom, but it was still a story RPG. In other words, when certain events occurred, The characters were supposed to take certain actions that were out of the player's control. But in reality, the story was different. There was no way for him to suddenly move his body spontaneously and recite a set line just because he went to a certain area. If that exists, it's a problem. In any case, the important thing was to trigger the event. If so, what should we do? How can I trigger an event in the game and get the same rewards? It was actually a simple story. Both Jude and Cordelia already knew the answer. You have to recreate the event. As we saw in Legend of Heroes 2, they perform certain actions in certain places. As if like a play. Please do a good acting, Yellow Storm. Jude winked and Cordelia raised up her middle finger. And 2 days later, the time of promise finally arrived. F***CK, F***CK, F***CK. The use of abusive language. Fuck. Okay, I give up. It would be good if you could focus on acting because you've relaxed your mind by cursing. Near a valley where you can pass by the mountain route. Jude, who had kept his back on the cursing Cordelia, had opened a watch he received from Gar L and counted the remaining time left. It's midnight when the event starts. Dahlia's bedtime was from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., and in these 2 hours, only Jude and Cordelia were here. It was the only time possible. Marja was a maid in the first place, so she was out of the night vigil, and if we asked the other knights to give us time alone, it would not have worked. The current time is 11:50. There were only 10 minutes left until the event was started. Are you ready? W8, if you look back, I'll kill you. You're all dressed up anyway. F***CK, all right, you can turn around now. When Cordelia gave her permission, Jude turned around and unconsciously let out his admiration. Wow, to be honest, I was surprised. I've known before that she was pretty, but should I say that I realized it again? Before Jude's eyes, Cordelia, wearing only a large towel, stood barefoot with her hair untied. Of course she's wearing clothes under the towel. Anyway, what should I say? Standing with her hair down under the fantastic moonlight, Cordelia was so beautiful that it was such a mysterious sight. If you laugh, I'll kill you. I'll kill you if you turn your eyes around. If you even keep looking at me, I'll kill you. Of course, if she hadn't opened her mouth. Hey, where the hell do you want me to look then? I don't know anyway, I'll start now, so hide well, okay? I understand, ma'am. Finally, the two, who exchanged glances, took a deep breath and moved to their respective designated positions. This was the beginning of the event. After using the mountain path, Cordelia finds a valley with a river during her journey and bathes in the river to wash off the sweat around midnight, away from people's eyes. Should I call it the service event? Actually, there was a similar event for Jude too. Either way, Cordelia, who was taking a bath, sings against the beauty of the moonlight. Ah, the water's F***seeking cold. Are you crazy? Why would I even go into the valley river in the middle of autumn, not in the summer? Cordelia, who dipped her feet slightly in the water, shuddered, and Jude, who hid in the bushes, sent the sign in a miserable mood. It was a sign to roughly begin to sing. Ha, really, Cordelia's totally crazy. Cordelia, who was criticizing her game character, shuddered in the water and opened her lips as she looked at the moon. In fact, at this point, I could understand why Cordelia was singing. When I went into the wide valley river alone in the darkness of night, I knew Jude was looking at me, but I was scared. How should I say it? It feels like something's about to pop out of the water. If I didn't sing, I couldn't withstand it. Twinkle little star tilde, shining beautifully tilde. When Cordelia began to sing timidly, Jude sent a sign again. It was a sign to sing the original song, but Yellow Storm was not Outboxer 009. How am I supposed to memorize a song that briefly played in the event? It's roughly the same as a song about stars, so it should work. How long has it been since I continued to sing with that thought? Beyond that, under the fantasy moonlight. There were those who responded to the song. Chapter 17, Episode 17, Sacred Rod, 2. The original event was like this. The beautiful song of Cordelia softly spread across the tranquil valley. The small animals that went down the valley to quench their throats tilted their ears to the clear voice and fine tunes, and even the fairy people that lived nearby started to react. The gathered fairies in twos and threes were first surprised by Cordelia's songs, and second, they were surprised by the dazzling appearance of Cordelia, who boasted a goddess-like beauty under the fantasy moonlight. And among them, one opened their mouth and spoke. "Let's invite her to the Queen's night banquet. The Queen will be happy too. We can't be the only ones to hear it, it's such a beautiful song." Although Cordelia was briefly embarrassed by the appearance of the fairies, she soon had the intention to accept the invitation of the cute and lovely fairies. And I wonder if it could lead to that. Jude, who was watching the situation while hiding in the bushes, looked at the valley with a terrible face. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." Yeah, well, the song from the original event was about stars. The present situation was similar to the original event because both songs were about stars and had a person singing. But unlike the original where it sounded beautiful and mysterious, instead, it sounded cute and lovely, so it was still nice to hear. My taste has gone bad. Yellowstorm is cute and lovely." Shaking his head to regain his senses, Jude's anxious eyes stared further away. And at some point, when she had sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in full 3 times, Cordelia, who was soaked up to her shoulders, shivered in the water's coldness. "It's here." Small lumps of light began to appear. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for a firefly, but the light was too bright and beautiful. Jude sent a sign out of the bush, and Cordelia nodded after seeing Jude's sign. In fact, she had already noticed. In the western sky tilde, in the eastern sky tilde, twinkle, twinkle, little star tilde. Cordelia sang and slowly raised her body, which had been deeply immersed in the water. She was still wrapped in a towel, but when she rose from the water, she felt a chill and shivered unconsciously. But this wasn't the time to be coughing here. Cordelia committed to singing, with a little more emotion under the beautiful moonlight. "She looks beautiful, Tilda." The lumps of light approached. Blue light, yellow light, green light. They were slightly larger than the palm, but the fairies were almost no different in appearance from adult women, except for the butterfly wings on their backs. They numbered 5 in total. The fairies, who came to Cordelia's side, flocked to each other and raised their voices a bit loudly. "It's a cute song. Why is she wearing a towel while taking a bath? How do you take a bath like that?" "I don't know, rather, her voice is beautiful. She has a pretty face too. It's thrilling, it's always fresh, and being pretty is the best." All the other fairies nodded their heads, as if they agreed to the last fairy's words. It's the same as in the game. The world's best-looking race is probably a fairy. Either way, they approached Cordelia, who was pretty and a good singer, without hesitation. Rather, it was Cordelia who was surprised. "Co-cute." As the fairies were small like the palms of her hands, and they moved in front of her eyes, Yellowstorm couldn't help but feel her girl's heart was stimulated. "Who are you? What is your name? Would you like to play with us? The Queen's night entertainment will begin. The Queen likes pretty girls." Cordelia grinned at the fairy's suggestion, and Jude, who was hiding and listening, let out a sigh of relief. "I was worried because the song was different, but it seemed to have gone smoothly. Maybe Cordelia's appearance is a fact more important than just singing. If you listened carefully to what they just said, they're inviting you only because you were pretty." Anyway, the process changed a bit, but things started to go according to the original event. Because of this, Jude erased his idle thoughts and set his eyes somewhere than Cordelia and the fairies. The next sequence in the original event. Cordelia hesitated for a moment, but eventually decided to accept the fairies' invitation. But right after that, a beast's roar burst. The roar was close to that of a wolf's, but it wasn't a wolf. Bicorn, also called a corrupted unicorn, it is a lascivious monster in the form of a horse with 2 horns. The appearance was on schedule, but not everything was the same as the original. Cordelia. As he jumped up from the bushes, Jude shouted. He had no choice but to do so. He ran towards Cordelia and shouted again. Get out of the water. The roar of the bighorn resounded. But there was nothing at the spot where the bighorn appeared in the original event. I looked around in a hurry, but it was the same. What it meant? It showed up, but the bighorn didn't know where it was. There was something that came to my mind at the moment. It was intuition. That's why Jude yelled to Cordelia to get out of the water. Kei Kerhyong. The moonlight reflected on the water's surface was broken. The bighorn spurted right on the water and rushed towards Cordelia. Cordelia. Jude kicked the ground, and at the same time, the bighorn with purple hair and a red mane rammed Cordelia with its head. It was a sudden collision. The fairies shrieked and scattered, and Cordelia soars upwards instead of being bounced off, and was thrown straight over the bighorn's back. It was telekinesis, one of the specialties of the bighorn. Kei Kerhyong. As soon as it captured Cordelia, it laughed pleasantly and burst out of the water, trying to leave as its eyes scattered a red glare. But Cordelia did not tolerate it. Stop! Cordelia twisted her body. She struggled fearlessly on the bighorn's back and threw herself into the water, away from the telekinesis. At the moment the water splashed hard with a thud, Cordelia, who fell plop into the water, rose up and floundered. The bighorn saw such Cordelia. The fairies screamed, and Jude sprinted towards Cordelia and the bighorn. And Cordelia yelled. Out! It was an urgent cry. Shouting without a chance to add boxer, she hurriedly took off the towel she was wearing. Red leotard. There was nothing to be embarrassed about because it's actually a one-piece swimsuit. Cordelia spread out the towel. The fairies looked at the towel reflexively, and so did the bighorn. But Jude didn't. The moment Cordelia had cried out, Jude understood. Because he figured out why Cordelia was calling him and what she was asking him for. Light. Inside the towel was a large drawn magic circle. A one-star magic that only illuminates light at best. However, the magic circle was not drawn for no reason. Several formulas amplified the magic. The mana that Cordelia poured covered the whole place with a pure and intense light. Kaya. Kei Kerhyong. The fairies and bighorn who were exposed to the vast amount of light closed their eyes and groaned. It was just a moment, but it was completely blinding. And it was the same for Cordelia, who kept her eyes open to focus the light on the bighorn. But only one person. Jude didn't close his eyes when Cordelia shouted. At the moment when the fairy's scream was cut off, Jude took off from the ground. Thud. 36 world steps. The footwork skill using inner Kai accelerated Jude. The distance between Jude and the bighorn was quickly reduced. The bighorn opened its eyes. But it still couldn't see properly. Jude rushed at the monster and swallowed his breath. For a moment, he cut off his breath and gave strength to his clenched fist. Slaughter. It doesn't stop at driving it away. Now that he's come this far, he has to take him down. Jude did not pull out the ceremonial sword from his waist. He used the sun's necklace to give strength to his hands that were wrapped around like a knuckle. Bang! Jude's fist hit precisely in the middle of the bighorn's forehead. It let out a shriek, but it was not yet over. Using the 36 world steps, Jude poured a series of attacks on the bighorn's head. Lightning punch. One of the Mugong taught by his father in that 3 days. It was 7 consecutive strikes made up of the first 4 hyper punches and a later 3 hyper punches, which meant 7 quick punches in the span of 1 lightning strike. I'll be honest, I have little idea what those first 4 hyper punches, or later 3 hyper punches, are. They were written in the chapter as, and my best guess is those are some kind of punches. The original text was this. Papapag. Jude's fist continuously struck the bighorn's forehead and cheeks. If it was an ordinary punch, it wouldn't even damage the bighorn, who can compete with the bear with its strength, so what Jude used was Mugong powered by his inner Kai. Moreover, the sacred power of the sun's necklace did not tolerate the existence of the bighorn belonging to the demons. Kei Kerhyong. All 7 consecutive strikes hit, but it was, after all, a bighorn. It stumbled for a moment before it shook its head and tried to hit Jude. It was quick and powerful, but at the same time, it was the attack Jude had been waiting for. Ochen. The bighorn's horns struck the air. Jude, who gained distance by using the 36 world steps, was satisfied. It wasn't because I was proud of myself for just evading the attack. Because I've done my job. I've made enough time. A short time. Jude exhaled. He smiled at the voice he looked forward to. Fire missile greater than. Cordelia. The dashing red magic missile burned through the darkness. As it burned its way forward, it exploded at the same time it hit the head of the bighorn. Boom, booms, boom. There was a roar. In the aftermath of the explosion, not only the surrounding air but also the surface of the water were shaken, and the fairies screamed. But instead of letting out an exclamation, Jude and Cordelia immediately prepared for the next step. Because neither side experienced a level-up effect. It was very likely that it was still alive. Dig greater than. Cordelia continuously chanted spells. She, who stalled the bighorn's feet and made it fall, clenched her teeth instead of preparing for the next magic. She had a headache. It was unreasonable to chant magic continuously in the aftermath of using the fire missile. The bighorn did not miss the gap when Cordelia staggered. With a burning, tumultuous glow in its eyes between its burnt and messed up head, it rushed towards Cordelia. As planned, it was true that she had a headache. It was no lie that it was too much to chant magic continuously. However, chanting magic wasn't the only thing that she could do. Bind! Cordelia shouted as she stretched out the magic stone. The magic stone was made by Count Chase himself and contained the magic of bind. It was originally given to her to use if Jude does some bullshit, and the magic stone boasted a very powerful and sturdy ability as it contained her father's heart. Kyuryuk. The bighorn that was tied by the translucent golden string fell into the water and struggled to regain its footing. Cordelia was not entirely unharmed either. She was already staggering, and the splash of water caused by the bighorn when it struggled and kicked made her fall down. But now she was in battle. Yellow Storm's head did not stop for a moment. About 10 seconds. The time when the bind can withstand the bighorn's struggle. About 15 seconds. The time needed for Cordelia to use the spell again. It was enough. Time was not running out. Right, Outboxer 009. One of the two things passed down by Count Bayer. Something I already heard in the carriage. That's why I was looking forward to this moment. Outboxer did not disappoint Yellow Storm's expectations. When Cordelia caught the bighorn's attention, he was already in preparation. I learned two things. Count Bayer properly recognized Jude's talent. At the same time, he also did not make a mistake of overlooking Jude's physical condition, because he was blinded by Jude's talent. Therefore, he taught only two things for 3 days. Continuous strikes for normal use. Lightning punch. It was a good technique. The power was not weak either, because a successful strike lets you pour 7 consecutive punches in the blink of an eye. But in the end, it was just a normal attack skill. One shot for the killing hit. In fact, it wasn't the right skill for the current Jude. The preparation time for using one shot took too long. Moreover, during the preparation time to concentrate the power, he had to be virtually defenseless. But that's why it was so powerful. Lightning punch could not even compare to it in terms of power. Cordelia flopped down into the water and looked at Jude. She smiled at the golden flash of light centered on Jude's fist. Lightning strike fist. Lightning burst from his fist. Jude advanced forward. A lightning bolt dropped over the bighorn's head. Chapter 18, Episode 18, Sacred Rod 3. Quackwang. A spray of water soared with the lightning strike. As the water surface broke down, the water that soared upwards poured down like a shower. Cordelia gasped while she sank to her knees in the water, and afterwards breathed a sigh of relief. We killed it. We defeated the bighorn. The level up effect has not yet emerged, but the situation was different from before. It's practically finished. We killed it. A smile spread across Cordelia's face. Yellow Storm herself admitted that deep down, she was a simple-minded person. Because of that, she fought with the bicorn and was very happy with the fact that they killed it. He's a little bit cool, isn't he? In front of Cordelia. She could see Jude standing with his fist, still in a hitting position. Just as Cordelia was an absolute beauty, Jude was an incomparably handsome boy. What she had seen was a handsome-looking Jude standing in a cool posture, so it was quite a nice scenery. If he wasn't outboxer, my heart would have been pounding. Cordelia giggled as she swept up her wet hair because of the water that poured, and then opened her mouth. She was going to ask for help in standing up. But right after that, Kyu-hyuk, Jude, who had stiffened while still in his punching position, suddenly gasped for air and then collapsed. Outboxer. The startled Cordelia hurriedly stood up and forced the drooping Jude to rise. Hey, are you okay? Hey. Kyu-hyuk's kak. Jude was panting heavily as his mouth tried to say something, but it was hard to understand at that moment. Therefore, Cordelia held and dragged Jude as they got out of the water. Kyu-hyuk's son's necklace. When she laid him down on the ground, it became more difficult to tell whether his conditions slightly improved or he was squeezing his last breaths. His right hand that held on the son's necklace with strength was about to droop. At that moment, Cordelia widely opened her eyes, shook her head and shouted, "Hey, no, you can't die. I'm not getting any mementos." Thaw that Kyu-hyuk chi chest. Jude made a gasping sound again and drooped his arm, and Cordelia blinked at that moment as she understood what Jude was trying to say. Bring the son's necklace back to his chest. Cordelia hurriedly unraveled the son's necklace that Jude was holding and hung it around his neck. Don't die, all right, huh? As she continued talking while using heal and checking if it was effective, Jude's fast breathing lessened and got calmer. I thought I was dying. Jude stuttered as he touched the son's necklace in his chest and panted. Lightning strike fist. The principle was really simple. It was quick and powerful like the strike of a lightning. Gather strength in one place and then hit. To be exact, it was a simple but powerful technique that gathers strength from all over the body into one place and then strikes the enemy. Although he was successful in somehow defeating the bicorn, due to the power of the lightning strike fist added to the anti-demon effect of the sun's necklace, the aftermath of using lightning strike fist was not small. Though Jude had used the footwork skill and Mugong, he has yet to fully recover from his Gyumjulmeek. This is what happens if I use the inner Kai. I didn't know exactly what the effect was, but I felt like my heart was going to stop because of the chill in my whole body. Fortunately, Cordelia was next to me, or I would have died holding the sun's necklace in my hand if there was no one else here. You're not some Iron Man. Understanding the situation at a glance, Cordelia flopped down next to Jude. It was because the rough tension had broken thanks to the fact that Jude was safe now. But at that exact moment, several white rings of light emerged around the bodies of Jude and Cordelia. It was the level-up effect. We killed it, Cordelia said absent-mindedly, and Jude nodded. Perhaps the bicorn, which lost consciousness after being hit by Jude, finally stopped breathing due to its injuries and breathing difficulties overlapping. Let me see, is it level 14 now? Yours is 15. When Cordelia asked, counting her fingers, Jude answered with only a nod. Since there was no status window, it was hard to know the level unless they memorized it or have it measured at the level temple. Anyway, it's improving a little. Leveling up fully restores your health and mana. No, there was no such kind of service, but somehow the stats have increased. Whether it was due to a rise in physical strength or a placebo effect, it felt like the recovery was faster. Then next is, in the original event, Cordelia protects the fairies and drives out the bicorn, and the impressed fairies invite Cordelia to the Fairy Queen's night banquet. Since I was the one who killed it, wouldn't they more or less give me more rewards? It was when I was thinking about it. Wow, they killed the bicorn. I have to report to the queen. But who else is this? Handsome. It's thrilling, it's always fresh, and being handsome is the best. The fairies, who fled and ran away, gathered next to Jude and Cordelia and squealed again. Because Jude was not in a position to speak properly, Cordelia cleared her throat and spoke. "This is my fiancé. He was keeping watch for any danger while I took a bath." The lines were prepared in advance in case he got discovered. After hearing Cordelia's explanation, the fairies looked around among themselves and said, "She's engaged. You were watching, you didn't steal a glance. But is she really taking a bath while wearing clothes? Hey, this is not the time, we have to let the queen know quickly." That's right, that's right. Fortunately, there was someone who seemed to be smart. The one with green butterfly wings flew close to Cordelia's face and continued to talk. Hey you, what's your name? I'm Adele." "Adele, I'm Yellow Cordelia, this is Jude." "Yellow Cordelia. Cordelia. Okay, Cordelia. Anyway, you and your fiancé killed the bicorn who was always bothering us. I was going to invite you because you were so pretty, but now I have to absolutely invite you. Come with us to see the queen. You will be rewarded by the queen." It was the flow we wanted. Cordelia seemed to be yelling as she pumped her fist and then looked back at Jude, and Jude glanced back with eyes that seemed to be proud of their hard work. "Are you going with us?" "Yes, I'll go with you." As Cordelia smiled and answered beautifully, Adele simultaneously smiled, as if she was in a good mood. "Yes, then follow us with your fiancé. You have to go into the water to get to where the queen is." The fairies were called a race that could be found everywhere and nowhere. It was because they were beings that crossed the walls of dimension and space. "Can you go?" "Roughly." When Cordelia asked quietly, Jude nodded his head and raised himself up. According to the original event, time would not pass so much in the Fairy Queen's residence, but in any case, this incident caused a little commotion, so a group led by Dahlia will soon come. It was good to finish the work before that. "Grab my hand, I'll help you up." "Thanks." Jude entrusted her to help him stand up by holding her hand. "This way." As the laughing fairies got ahead, Cordelia, who was diligently chasing them, spoke. "By the way, you defeated the bicorn." "I killed it." "Then the horns will come out, right? If you pull it out, it will come out." In the game, the horn was dropped as soon as I defeated it, but this was reality here. "One is mine." "Yes, the remaining one is mine." Fortunately, the bicorn had 2 horns. Like the unicorn's horn, it had many uses, but the most common use was to smelt it to make a dagger. The items made from the bicorn's horns could cause a variety of status conditions, including confusion, charmed, etc. After their business with the Fairy Queen is over, she'll ask Dahlia and the escorts to take care of the bicorn's corpse. Just imagining it made her feel better, and Cordelia smiled. "It's so clear." "What's the water?" Instead of answering, Jude just smiled, and Cordelia followed the fairies into the water after tilting her head a few times. "I can breathe in the water, something like that did not happen." I just closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I was in a completely different place. It was a large open space, nestled among large and small trees. It was a place that felt very cozy despite the fact that it was in the woods, because the soft and warm yellow light melted the darkness like the moonlight. Dozens of fairies were gathered in the open area. And they were dancing, singing, and bustling about, as if the night banquet was already in full swing. I feel like I'm in the country of dolls. Cordelia blushed slightly and spoke quietly, but Jude decided to ignore her for now. It was because this was not the online chat, and it was kind of hard to make fun of her offline now. In any case, giants appeared at the place where palm-sized fairies gathered and played, forcing everyone's eyes to naturally focus on the two. "What is it? What is it?" "It's a human. But she's pretty and he's handsome." "Are you today's invited singer?" "They're soaking wet." As they were chattering among themselves, Adele stepped forward and shouted to everyone. "We have to take her to the queen. They defeated the bicorn." As they stepped forward, a group of 4 fairies also stepped forward and pushed the other fairies away. "Come on, let's go, this way." Moving behind Adele, the road opened up among the fairies like the miracle of Moses. And how far along did we go? Strangely enough, the surrounding landscape changed little by little every step. The surrounding fairies diminished and became fewer every meter, and the gap between the trees narrowed, as if we were walking on a narrow corridor. And a few steps again. When we stopped, Adele, who had taken the lead, was also gone. We were in a small, round room. Instead of a ceiling, a dark night sky was above, and the moonlight that came down gently lit up the surroundings beautifully. It's been a long time since I've seen a human child in person. The fairy queen was young and beautiful. She had colorful butterfly wings with various colors, and blue eyes and a brilliant blonde hair as if it was made by melting gold. With white skin, she was wearing a grass-green dress and holding a cane studded with jewelry in her hand. I greet the fairy queen. When Jude bowed and greeted, Cordelia was flustered and greeted too, and the fairy queen seemed to smile cutely. Like all fairies, she was only the size of a palm, but the queen is still a queen. You could feel the aura unique to those who are leaders of a group. I heard the story from Adele. For the fairies that could even freely cross space, even time was not a completely forbidden realm. At a time when Jude and Cordelia were taking a few steps, the fairy queen had met Adele and talked to her in a gap of time. The bicorn has been one of our oldest troubles. I can't help but award you for taking care of it. At the fairy queen's words, Jude was slightly nervous. In the original event, the focus was on the fact that Cordelia devotedly protected the fairies, rather than the fact that she kicked out the bicorn. What if she gives her something else? Because what Jude and Cordelia needed right now was the sacred rod, moonlight. However, unlike Jude, Cordelia's eyes were glistening with anticipation without thinking of anything else. Cordelia, I think this would be good for you, the wizard. When the fairy queen shook her hand elegantly, the roots of the trees covering the floor opened, and a wooden stick with silver jewels, short to be called a rod, but long enough to be a cane, came out. Moonlight! Jude and Cordelia cheered almost simultaneously in their hearts. It's an unusual item, but it's too big for us to use. It would be better to be in the hands of those who have good hearts than to be left in a place like this. Take it. Fortunately, it was a line similar to the original event. Jude was relieved, and Cordelia smiled and reached out to the moonlight. And Jude, I will reward you too. By the time Cordelia was happy to hold the moonlight tightly in her hands, the fairy queen looked back at Jude and spoke. From this point on, it was not in the original event, but Jude had more expectations than worries. If I get anything, it's a plus. It is different from moonlight. Originally, I shouldn't have received anything, but honestly, it was a profit no matter what I will receive. What will the fairies give me? Fairy stone, fairy whispers. It was the time to think of these and other items in my head. Take it. When the fairy queen waved her hand gracefully again, this time, a branch automatically moved and held out a silver ring to Jude. Soon after, Jude's eyes opened wide. Don't tell me. The identity of the ring. Cordelia was also surprised. If moonlight was a B-rank item, the item in front of us was actually an A rank, but in a sense, closer to an S rank. Fairy steps. The effect was simple. The number of daily uses varies from 1 to 3 depending on the user's ability, but the user can jump over space. In fact, from the game's perspective, it was a rather vague explanation. However, the walkthrough site, Legend of Heroes Wall, summarized the fairy steps as follows. Ignore enemy attacks. The moment the attack comes in, you will be temporarily moved to another space to completely avoid the attack. What was different from normal evasion was the fact that there was no need at all to move on the spot. It was indeed a tremendous effect, even if there was a daily limit in the number of uses. You're giving me this. Of course, defeating the bicorn was not an easy task. Maybe the bicorn caused more trouble to the fairies than I could have imagined. But even so, the reward felt a bit excessive. This has the same reason as the moonlight. Moreover, the fairy steps were originally made to be used by other races. And it wasn't just that. The fairy queen, who can transcend space and even time, felt a strong fate from Jude and Cordelia, though it was limited. It's touching. The fate of the world. The fate of these two wasn't going to just end with an individual's destiny. If I had been a little stronger, I would have known more. The fairy queen in this world wasn't just one, and she was still a young fairy queen. But she was definitely a queen, and it was also true that she felt a strong fate. Therefore, the fairy queen did not hesitate to pass on the fairy steps and moonlight to Jude and Cordelia. Thank you. When Jude carefully accepted the ring and bowed to her, the fairy queen smiled gracefully and then looked at Cordelia. I'm happy to get an unexpected high-end item, but in a word, I was envious and slightly upset because Jude received a higher-than-expected item. Though her appearance was cute, but the fairy queen made a deeper smile. There's a reason why this is the reward. Cordelia flinched at the fairy queen's words, but soon nodded. In fact, Cordelia roughly knew the reason. She was a wizard and Jude was a warrior. It was only natural to give a wizard a magic wand and an evasive item to a close combat warrior. But the fairy queen suddenly shook her head. She knew what Jude and Cordelia were thinking, and it wasn't wrong, but there was actually one more reason. I like a handsome man more than a pretty woman. The fairy queen was a fairy after all. The fairy queen wore an elegant smile in front of Jude and Cordelia, who looked at her with a blank expression. Chapter 19, Episode 19, Sacred Rod, 4. Time had passed, and when Jude and Cordelia opened their eyes, they suddenly found themselves sitting in the valley at midnight, instead of the fairies' banquet hall. Achoo! We were in a daze for a while, but when Jude suddenly sneezed, Cordelia came to her senses and looked around. The valley, are we back? The banquet's over, right? They had been desperate earlier, but now, Jude nodded to her comment. That's right, it's the valley, the banquet is over, it's over. Wow, it's over, it's finally over. Cordelia jumped up and down in the water and hugged Jude. He embraced Cordelia too, as they both felt emotional and relieved. For 12 hours, Jude and Cordelia spent their time at the fairies' banquet hall after their meeting with the fairy queen. RF*CK, I will never sing Little Star again. Cordelia shuddered as she was fed up with it. She was made to sing it not just 6 times, but more than a dozen times. Moreover, it wasn't just Little Star. Yellow Storm. Why, do you only know the nursery rhymes? She had sung 3, Twinkle Little Star. Cordelia said with a snort. No, it's not, I know a lot of other songs. I adjusted it to that of a fairy's level, okay? Okay, well, it was cute. In fact, Jude himself could only sing in full a handful of popular Korean songs. Jude laughed and moved on, and Cordelia pushed Jude away from their hug, and then grumbled. Moving on, I really thought I was dying. In the game, I didn't understand the true meaning of the line, time has passed, that was said in passing, but now, I realize that this isn't something a normal human could completely do. I agree. Playing with dozens of fairies felt like taking care of dozens of beagles at the same time. Cordelia was made to sing endlessly. But both also had to struggle hard among the fairies, especially Jude, who was well liked because of his handsomeness. The fairy queen, too, was a fairy. Yeah. Jude could still remember in his eyes the elegant-looking figure of the fairy queen smiling, and even encouraging the fairies trying to undress him. If the fairy queen hadn't come out in person, I would have been very thankful to her. Who? Sighing almost at the same time, Jude and Cordelia soon sneered and laughed. Regardless. Mission clear. The two did a high five before looking at their own loot. Cordelia got her hands on the sacred rod, Moonlight. Moonlight is an item that can be recharged by converting moonlight into mana. It was a very useful tool for wizards who always had to suffer from constantly running out of mana. It has a built-in lethal move too. It was the true reason why Jude tried to get the moonlight. It would clearly play a big part in their fight against the Devil's Hand. And the fairy steps. Looking at the silver ring on his right index finger, a smile was drawn on his face. The number of uses was limited to once per day at Jude's current level, but that alone was something to be very grateful of. In essence, it was like having another life. Hey, the bicorn's good too. Yeah, it's good. 12 hours have passed at the fairies' banquet, but in reality, only 10 seconds have passed. Jude and Cordelia looked back in the direction where the bicorn collapsed. With faces mixed with joy and awkwardness, they looked at the bicorn's corpse floating halfway in the water. The reason was simple. I suppose we'll have to pull it out from there. At Cordelia's question, Jude nodded. Because it doesn't drop like in the game. But it was also a good thing. When you defeat the bicorn, you can get 2 horns. In the game, however, it was very natural for it to be an uncommon drop. I defeated it, but I only got 1 horn or didn't get any at all. Whereas in reality, you could obtain not only the horns but everything else too. Don't worry too much, the knights would do the collecting. Oh yeah, we're the children of counts, right? Cordelia felt the sweetness of power again. Miss, young master. Where are you, young master? Miss. From afar came the voices of the knights. It would be strange for them to not notice the bursting of a tremendous amount of light and the roaring sounds. Miss, where are you, Lady Cordelia? Young Master Jude. Dahlia and Marge's voices gradually approached. Cordelia made a long face and said while looking at Jude. We are. Yes, we are. In a lot of trouble, right? In a lot of trouble. We'll certainly not be scolded. It didn't stop at the 2 of us stealthily sneaking out, but we also fell into the water and made a mess of ourselves. Don't worry, Cordelia. Do you perhaps have a plan so that we won't get scolded? No, just. If you give up, it's easy. Jude smiled refreshingly, and Cordelia gave him a middle finger. Jude and Cordelia were exceedingly scolded. Sir Zebek, a knight from Count Chase, was in charge of the party's journey. Count Bayer and Count Chase had put him up as their proxy, and so he issued Jude and Cordelia a ban on going out of the carriage. If the young master and miss would find it necessary to spend some time alone together, this humble knight would offer to make it possible. In front of Sir Zebek, who spoke very seriously, Jude and Cordelia could only bow their heads. But it wasn't really that bad for them. In the first place, there were no more matters that we persistently need to go out and take care of in our journey to Langesthay. Rather, it was good for the 2 to discuss their future plans while being alone together in the carriage. I'm sorry for Dahlia, but... Sir Zebek severely scolded Dahlia for forgetting her escort duty and exposing the 2 to danger. He imposed on her a pay-cut measure as punishment. Cordelia worked hard to defend her, but it was inevitable. However, is it fortunate that our public opinion is favorable? The public opinion referred here was the knights of Count Bayer and Count Chase. In reality, they now didn't find it surprising for the 2 to go to the valley. It was because of the circulating rumors about how Jude and Cordelia deeply yearned for each other since last week's daytime runaway. What the knights paid attention to was the fact that Jude and Cordelia defeated the bicorn together. Young master, you've become very strong. The young master inherited the count's talent after all. In the memories of Count Bayer's retainers and knights, Jude was always sick and couldn't even freely go outside. They were naturally thrilled that Jude was not only healthy now, but that he could also defeat not just a goblin, but a bicorn. Especially in Jun's case, as he was delighted and in a hurry to write and send a letter to the Count. Count Chase's knights rejoiced in a slightly different sense, focusing more on the fact that Jude has become stronger than on the fact that Cordelia defeated the bicorn with Jude. Cordelia was Count Chase's youngest child, and a pretty woman that everyone in the family sincerely loved. Since Cordelia was going to marry an always sick man like Jude, no one had spoken openly. However, a few were concerned and worried, and there was also a lot of dissatisfaction. Well, how can you not be happy now that Jude was showing quite a reliable figure? Sir Zebek also immediately wrote a letter to Count Chase after scolding Jude and Cordelia hard. I like him now. It was a short and bold comment, but it really was Sir Zebek's respectful feelings. Anyhow, it was sorted out to some extent, and half a day passed. Jude was lingeringly sick inside the carriage. It's a cold. As Cordelia had briefly commented, Jude caught a cold. It was caused by having fallen into the valley water on an autumn night, but the biggest cause was wandering around while wet. Brrr. Jude was covered with a blanket and had a wet towel on his head. He was half asleep as he was lying on the carriage seat, and Cordelia clicked her tongue. I didn't get sick. What about it? It was the perfect time for Jude to talk back to her, but he had to agonize over his headache. I'll change the towel. Cordelia personally changed Jude's towel and wiped the sweat off on visible parts like his forehead and neck. Thank. Yes. If Gyumjal make healed. Yes, I'll carry you, hit you, cross the wall, stand in the front line, and nurse you when you're sick, right? When Cordelia spoke fluently, Jude had a blank look, and she soon had a little laugh. I remember everything, so be prepared. At any rate, she was very happy to have fought back against Jude. For now, just go to sleep without thinking. Cordelia arranged the towel and sat down again, opening a book. Jude looked at her for a moment before closing his eyes. Late in the afternoon, Jude barely opened his eyes and stood up. He shook Cordelia, who was dozing off on the opposite side. Hey, wake up, stop drooling. Ugh. Cordelia quickly lifted her head and wiped off her drool while floundering. She's really pretty. She was pretty even though she was drooling and floundering. After a moment's thought, Jude looked outside the carriage window and continued to talk. Let's get down to business. So, how are you, okay? Cordelia shook her head and came to her senses. She opened the lid of the water bottle and asked. Oh, after a good night's sleep, I think I feel better. This guy's also effective. When he lifted the sun's necklace from his neck, Cordelia laughed and spoke. What's the second cure to Gyumjal meek? It's Muan's sweet water. After a certain amount of big talk, the two became ready to discourse. Jude sat down and opened the lid of his water bottle as he said, Perhaps if we go like this, we'll arrive at Lanjesthay in 3 days. Even if they slowly traveled and run for several days by carriage, their destination was still quite a distance to reach, because they both came from the faraway town of Balon. Cordelia used her fingers to count the days, and said as she blinked her eyes. So is it about 4 days before the event starts? Perhaps. Jude and Cordelia were currently a day ahead of the Cordelia in the main scenario. The events in Lanjesthay were more than 10, from large events to small ones, but Cordelia was talking about only one event now. The first main event in Cordelia's main scenario was the Devil's Hands attack. This is how the original story unfolds. Miners from the 12 northern families gathered in the commercial city of Lanjesthay. Not all children from the 12 families gathered, like Jude, who was absent in the original scenario. There were quite a few families who have been absent for reasons such as a lack of miners or being busy at home. In Cordelia's main scenario, the number of families that participated was only half, or 6. With Jude added to this, 7 families were now gathered. Lanjesthay does not belong to any of the 12 families. It was the reason why it was chosen as the social gathering place of the 12 families' members. But not all 12 families in the north were on good terms. After all, it was just the 12 strongest families in the north, and not because they had a great bond or solidarity amongst each other. Depending on the location, there were some families that were competitors and in severe cases had hostile relations. We are the exception. Engagement and political marriages were common amongst the 12 families, but there was only a handful of families that really got along, like Count Bayer and Count Chase. In addition, as you know, this event is very hard from the start, to undergo pain from the beginning of the story, that is to say, how the scenario occurs. As for the conclusion, the attack of the Devil's Hand succeeded. They killed some of the children from the 12 northern families, and after kidnapping some, they even committed brutalities like using the victims as a sacrifice for summoning the devil. The world of Legend of Heroes 2 was moving towards Armageddon. In short, it was a world moving towards the end, and one of the starting points was the attack of the Devil's Hand. Can we really stop this? The story was a little strange, but Cordelia liked the character Cordelia. That is, she played as Cordelia several times when she was Yellow Storm. Therefore, Yellow Storm knew the severity of the attack of the Devil's Hand. The number of enemies mobilized in the immediate attack exceeded 100 by a ridiculous margin. Even though she now possessed moonlight, she wondered if they could stop the event with just the power of Jude and herself. Isn't it better to just cancel the event itself? How? When Jude asked back, Cordelia opened her lips but soon shut it again. It was because she couldn't think of anything. It was doubtful if people will believe Jude and Cordelia if they talk about the attack of the Devil's Hand. However, it was too much to create a mess in the social gathering itself just for an excuse to cancel it. If that happened, it was highly likely that Jude and Cordelia would be kicked out of the social gatherings. There was no clear evidence that there would be an attack by the Devil's Hand. Furthermore, it was possible that the story would get messed up if it was dismissed carelessly. The Devil's Hand could have attacked the 12 families individually. As Cordelia racked her brains and was distressed, Jude clicked his tongue and unfolded a paper. I have an idea. What is it? A good idea. F***CK. When Cordelia got angry, Jude laughed and continued to talk, moving his pen on the paper. First of all, let's do this. It was a plan that the two rotten waters, Jude and Cordelia, can pull off in this world. Jude began to explain, and Cordelia listened attentively. She soon opened her eyes wide. Cordelia had a bright smile on her face. Chapter 20, Episode 20, Devil's Hand 1. Terms used in this chapter, in case you didn't know. Oppa, what a female calls her biological older brother. It can also be used to call a male friend older than her within the boundary of 10 years. The schedule went smoothly. It's been 3 days since the fairies' night banquet. In the carriage running towards Langersthey, Jude kept his eyes slightly open and looked at the front. Cordelia and Dahlia sat close together, chatting in small voices. They look like real sisters. I already knew that in Legend of Heroes 2, the relationship between the two were more than an escort warrior and an escort target. However, seeing it in reality now feels new to me. It's a relief. Cordelia wasn't the only one worried about the troubles she continuously caused to Dahlia ever since the daytime runaway. Back then, Cordelia had said this in my presence with a tearful face. What should I do if Dahlia hates me? It was her Cordelia self that was more than her being Yellow Storm too. For Cordelia, Dahlia was not just an escort, but a real older sister. If you think that you are hated by such a person, it's a huge relief. Dahlia forgave Cordelia again this time. Of course, Dahlia was not an infinitely virtuous person, so she scolded Cordelia properly this time. Recalling the image of Cordelia who was laughing after being scolded, Jude unwittingly smiled and turned his eyes to the side at that moment. You foo-foo. Jude's exclusive maid, Marja, was like a real older sister to him. She was curiously watching Jude looking at Cordelia, and her elegant smile was reminiscent of the Fairy Queen. She seemed to be holding back what she wanted to say. Don't talk to me, don't talk to me. I could almost tell what she wanted to say. Jude turned away from Marja's gaze and closed his eyes. And 20 minutes later, around the time Jude was blinking and about to fall asleep. Miss, we have arrived, this is Langersthey. Dahlia's bright voice suddenly woke Jude up as he opened his eyes and looked around. Cordelia was sticking her head out of the carriage window. Wow, it's real. It was Cordelia's first time in Langersthey. Of course, Yellow Storm had gone in the city back and forth dozens to 100 times, but just as how Jude felt when he saw Cordelia and Dahlia, there was also an insurmountable gap between the game and reality for her. Young Master should look too. When Marja suggested it, Jude rose from his seat pretending he couldn't win against her and stuck his head out of the window on the other side. Wow, it was just as I saw in the game, but in a much grander and more realistic form. The symbol of Langersthey was the huge gate with the 10-meter-tall knight statues on the gate's left and right. People filled the wide road that could fit a couple of carriages at the same time. At the sunlight that broke and scattered throughout the city, Jude took a deep breath. Langersthey. It was the beginning city where Jude and Cordelia's main scenarios started. It was the same this time. The form and timing were a little different, but the journey to create a new ending will also begin in this city. I think I can hear the BGM. When you arrive at Langersthai back in the game, the merry theme Song of Langersthai would then be playing. As I came back to my seat casually humming, I heard Cordelia humming as well. Hey, you too. Hey, me too. No more words were needed. The two exchanged glances and laughed at the same time. Marja and Dahlia, who were watching them, were puzzled, but they eventually smiled pleasantly. First of all, I have to sell my father. No, this was not a human trafficking story. It was a measure to stop the devil's hand. Jude had prepared an operation that was divided into 3 stages. As soon as he arrived at Langersthai and took up quarters, instead of lying down, resting, or going shopping in the commercial district, he led his entire party, except for Marja, to the Night Order's headquarters in the center of the city. The Order of the Blue Lion. The 12 families, led by the Margrave, Count H.R. Svelga, were practically self-governing the north, but that did not mean it was an independent area of the kingdom. In cities like Langersthai that do not belong to any of the 12 families, knights dispatched from the royal palace were in charge of public security. I'm the second son of Count Bayer, Mr. Jude Bayer. I would like to see the Knight Commander. Yes. They were in the lobby of the building, which was like that of the large top branches rather than the headquarters of the Night Order. Everyone was bewildered by what Jude had said in front of the squire, who seemed to be handling various applications. Young master. When Jun asked quietly, as if to replace Marja, who was left in their lodgings, Jude raised his hand a little and explained it to the squire. My father, Count Bayer, wrote a letter to the Knight Commander. He told me to deliver it myself. When Jude spoke with a low voice, the squire of a similar age to him was surprised. The name of Count Bayer, one of the 10 swordmasters of the Len Kingdom, was a magical word that made the hearts of swordsmen jump, regardless of their nationality. However, that Count Bayer had said that he had asked his son to personally deliver the letter, so it was enough to let Jude meet the commander without an appointment. Please wait for a moment. The squire hurriedly got up and went inside, and Jun asked again. Young master, was this a secret order of the Count? It's not to the point of secrecy, Jude said with a smile, and Cordelia tried hard to conceal her uneasy expression. Please come in, he said he would meet you right now. When the squire came back and spoke, Jude took a small deep breath and turned towards Cordelia. She was the only one here who knew the truth, so she asked with an eye gesture. Can you do it? I can do it. It was just the beginning. The determined Jude told the party to wait, and then followed the instructions of the squire to the Knight Commander's office. The story was simple. Count Bayer accidentally bumped into a group of demon followers on his way back from the expedition, which resulted in the discovery of a document. It was a cryptographic document, but when interpreted, pointed to a specific place in Langersthai. There was nothing else except for a listed place, so perhaps it's got something to do with the demon followers. The Blue Lion's commander, who was a typical middle-aged knight, Sir Bayer nodded at Jude's words. He had always respected Count Bayer, and because the Count was entangled with the demon followers, which can be said to be the kingdom's enemies, it was necessary to search that place. Well, I understand. I'll try to move as soon as possible. Thank you, by the way. What is it? There is something I would like to ask for. Tell me. It's an immature story, but can I come with you? Mr. Bayer. Yes, I'm ashamed to tell you, but I've always been in the house because of my illness, Gumjalmeek, so I've never been involved in a proper family affair. So, at least, I would like to participate in this work that my father entrusted to me. What's more, it's the Order of the Blue Lion which my father usually praised in many ways, so I think I'll have a lot to learn. As Jude spoke in an earnest tone, he caught a glimpse of Sir Bayu's reaction, which was not bad. Especially in the part where Count Bayer praised the Order of the Blue Lion, the corners of Sir Bayu's mouth was raised. Of course, if Cordelia was here, rather than focusing on the illness, she would have commented on how good of a scammer he was. In any case, Lord Bayu hid his delight with a cough, and opened his mouth again. But Mr. Bayer, it can be dangerous. Yes, I will take the risk. Of course, if it gets really dangerous, I'll take a step back with Count Bayer's and Count Chase's knights so that I won't cause trouble for the Order of the Blue Lion. Ah, indeed, there was a social gathering of the 12 families. Sir Bayo nodded, as if his thoughts had gone crazy, overhearing Count Chase's name too. Okay, I'll allow you to accompany me, but like you said, you should just follow us, do you understand? I'll keep that in mind, thank you very much. When Jude smiled broadly, Sir Bayo also smiled pleasantly. Having a connection with Count Bayer in any way was quite a pleasure for any warrior. After 2 hours has passed. Let's start. Uho, in the name of the Blue Lion. If this was Korea, it would have had to go through complicated procedures, such as getting warrants, but not in the Len Kingdom. Members of the Blue Lion, led by the Knight Commander Sir Bayua, rushed into the building located in the suburbs. Soon, the sounds of fighting, including yelling and screaming, were heard loudly. The knights of Count Bayer and Count Chase, who came all the way here, were somewhat embarrassed, but their eyes changed when the knights began the battle. Do you think it will work out? It will work out. As we watched the start of the operation from quite a distance, Cordelia asked in a whisper. In fact, the most important thing was from now on. In Lanjesthay, the Devil's Hand gathered in 12 places. Because more than 100 people could not be gathered in one place, they were divided into small groups to lie low. It was only one place that the Order of the Blue Lion raided. I only know the locations of 6 more places. The game did not reveal the locations of all 12 places. The problem is how to deliver the locations of the 6 more places I know. Of course, there was a way to give out the other 6 locations, saying that Count Bayer found them in some documents, but there were some problems. It was strange that Count Bayer did not immediately give out all 7 locations, and the documents that were obtained unexpectedly contained not only the gathering locations, but also the information of all the key members of the attack. All of that would seriously feel out of place. That's why I prepared this. It seems to have been sorted out. Jun said when the sound of fighting inside the building stopped. Now that we are going to start searching the place in earnest, we had to move as well. Let's go in too. Cordelia followed Jude as he declared and strode in, and the knights followed them after a moment's consideration of whether to dissuade him or not. Okay, let's start. The inside of the building was bizarre, unlike the outside that looked fine. It was because of the symbols and ornaments of demon worship scattered everywhere. As the Blue Lion scoured around the building for more information, Jude slipped in and spotted a box that looked adequate, so he winked at Cordelia. Now. When Jude sent her a sign, Cordelia suddenly placed her hand on her forehead and pretended to stagger. Our dizzy. Miss. So sorry, I'm a little dizzy. It was a performance that was close to reading a Korean language book as usual, but the effect was good anyhow. This is because not only their group, but also the knights around them were looking at the beautiful and fragile Cordelia, who was dizzy at the sight of the devil's bust. And in the meantime, Jude quickly moved his hand. As soon as he opened the lid of the box, he lifted up the documents he had brought in his pocket. Sir Bayua, I think I found something. When Jude shouted, Sir Bayua and his aides who were looking around the place rushed to him. The same was true of Jude's party. I found these in the box. I think it's some important documents. Sir Bayua received the documents that Jude presented. His expression hardened immediately and then nodded his head. The documents contained information on important members, as well as other gathering locations of the Devil's Hand in Lanjesthay. Did it help? Of course, it was a great help. Your father will be happy too. I'm glad to hear that. Jude breathed a sigh of relief with a bright face at Sir Bayua's loud praise, and Cordelia's lips cringed. Wow, that fraudster, look at him lying through his teeth. It was a natural reaction, because Jude had created the documents in the first place. Diminish their power. He shakes off 7 out of the 12 locations. Even if some failed due to information that leaked along the way, it was enough to hurt the Devil's Hand group in Lanjesthay. With Sir Bayou at the forefront, the Order of the Blue Lion rushed back to their headquarters, and Jude and his party headed back to their quarters. Perhaps some good news will be delivered today or tomorrow. However, the operation is not yet over. Do you think they'll give up? No, because they're fanatics. The Devil's Hand's members were the exact definition of a fanatic. In the first place, they didn't care about using humans as sacrifices for summoning demons, so they wouldn't give up easily even if their power diminished. Therefore, Jude looked back at Cordelia and said refreshingly, "So let's sell your father now." What is this crazy bastard saying? In truth, it was far from real selling. Rather than committing fraud using Count Chase's name, it was about getting help. The outline of the second stage of the operation was also simple. Call up the wizards from the Red Dawn Tower. If the Devil's Hand actually pushes ahead with the attack, we would eventually have to rely on force at the end. That is why we cut the enemy's power and increase our allies' strength. In order to defeat demonic human Minos, the attack's boss, we desperately needed the help of the flame wizard, Ronin. Cordelia, Count Chase's biological daughter, visits the wizards of the Red Dawn Tower to ask for help. Demon followers have appeared in Langesthay. Can you help us during the social gathering in case they attack? It was a request made by a beautiful girl, who was also the daughter of the Tower Master. In fact, the Order of the Blue Lion were in the middle of rushing around Langesthay, so if you were an ordinary wizard, you'd definitely reply to Cordelia asking for a favor. Because as Sir Bayou said, the demon followers were the enemy of the Len Kingdom. I had prepared in case they didn't listen. Cordelia took out the letter she had kept in her inner chest pocket and opened it. It was a summons signed by Count Chase, but it was actually fake and not real. It was a felony to counterfeit official documents with the signature of the Tower Master, so it was made to be used in the worst-case scenario. Wow, how did he make this look so real? I've already admired it several times, but the more I looked at it, the more amazing the forgery skill was. Not only did he copy Count Chase's signature almost perfectly, but the contents of the letter were just as good as Count Chase's. No matter how much data and information his biological daughter, Cordelia herself, provides, this was impossible. This is absolutely not the skill of an ordinary citizen. Was he really a scammer? There was the almost perfect forgery skills, the cunning acting performance, and in the first place, the idea that you can forge documents. It's possible. The excited Cordelia exhaled loudly from her nose and clenched her fist. Then Jude spoke, poking her side. Hey, I can totally see your delusions. For your information, I was a law-abiding good citizen who paid my taxes well. Tax, you paid taxes. Then will you evade taxes, stop talking nonsense and let's begin. We needed time for the wizards near Langesthay to come all the way here. We also had to hurry so that we could meet the schedule of the social gathering. But it was then. Cordelia. Yes. When Cordelia, who was intently thinking about something, suddenly looked up and answered, Jude looked at her in suspicion for a moment. Let's hurry. Yes. However, it was unreasonable to sneak out, so Jude thought he should take Dahlia and Jun too. Looking at Jude's back who led the way, Cordelia continued her delusion that was temporarily interrupted. Tax. Pay taxes. Member of society. Real adult. So upper. I had never thought about Outbox's age. Hey, aren't you coming? No, yes, I'll go. Cordelia answered hurriedly to Jude's urging, hastening her footsteps. Chapter 21, Episode 21, Devil's Hand 2. Terms used in this chapter. Tech tree, in strategy computer games, it is a hierarchical visual representation of the possible sequences of upgrades a player can take. Jiren, also known as Kirin in Chinese or Kirin in Japanese, it is an imaginary and mysterious animal in the East which is said to appear when a saint is born in the real world. Many things had happened overnight. Recognizing the seriousness of the problem, the Blue Lion's commander, Sir Bayou, mobilized not only the knights, but also the general soldiers of the Langesthay Guard, to simultaneously strike all 6 branches of the Devil's Hand. Because of that, the Devil's Hand didn't have a way to resist the simultaneous raids. Although more than 100 people had sneaked in Langesthay, the group had been scattered into 12 branches, with around 10 people per branch. The Devil's Hand were overpowered and literally defeated by the human wave strategy of the knights and soldiers. As a result, 6 branches were destroyed. Even though one branch noticed the situation and fled, it was already a huge achievement that 6 out of 7 branches were destroyed. This meant that the Devil's Hand had suffered a huge blow. Wow, what the hell happened? In a forest near Langersthai, a middle-aged man, with a bulging and protruding belly, burst into an angry voice inside a forest ranger's cabin. He is Baron Edgar, a man of wealth among the 3 fingers of the Devil's Hand, and one of their longtime sponsors. 7 branches were robbed overnight. Do you know how much money I spent trying to hide those guys? Moreover, the guys that had hidden this time were not just all sorts of people. All were combatants, so the damage caused to the Devil's Hand was enormous. I apologize, we're still trying to figure out the cause. The demon follower, disguised as a forest ranger, bowed his head at the end of Baron Edgar's gaze. In fact, he was also bewildered. The Order of the Blue Lion knew the location of the branches too accurately. Oh damn it, what happened to the rest of the branches? It's more dangerous to move right now, so they've been hiding somewhere else outside the branches. Ah, my blood pressure, Lord Minos, can we still proceed with this? Baron Edgar, who had raised his anger over the forest ranger, asked as he looked at the last person seated inside the cabin. He is demonic human Minos, a distinguished figure from the Devil's Hand's headquarters, and is in command of the entire attack. With a pale skin and bluish-silver hair, he looked like a 20-year-old man. However, demonic humans who accepted the demons into their bodies cannot be judged just by their appearances. Minos was disguised as Baron Edgar's nephew, and was dressed in a young nobleman's attire. He then said with a cold smile, "It's not whether we can or cannot proceed, Baron Edgar. We will proceed as per my orders." 5 of the 12 branches still remain. Their troops were more than halved, but there was no option of not carrying out the attack. As he involuntarily flinched at Minos' glistening eyes, Baron Edgar shut his mouth and stepped back. He had thought that he'd be hit if he insisted in talking about it any longer. Minos had a small laugh at Baron Edgar's behavior. Edgar was a loud and frivolous man, but the one thing Minos liked about him was that he could read the atmosphere well. First of all, we've managed to obtain information from our side. At Minos' words, Baron Edgar pricked his ears again and showed interest, but just as it was before, he kept his energy down and did not press Minos to talk. The forest ranger gulped and waited for Minos to talk too. Minos continued his story with a slight frown. Count Bayer's son, Jude Bayer, and Count Chase's daughter, Cordelia Chase, arrived in Langersthai this morning. In the first place, Minos came to Langersthai to attack the 12 northern families' social gathering. It was only natural to pay close attention to the entry and exit of the 12 families' children. As soon as they took up their quarters, they headed for the Blue Lions' headquarters. Then the Blue Lions' raid on the branches began. The timing was too perfect to dismiss it as separate events. Baron Edgar raised a fuss, saying, "Ha, you mean that chap and bitch handed over our branch's information to the Blue Lion? How the hell did they know?" Count Bayer and Count Chase resided in the remote and distant Balon, which was several days away from Langersthai, even by carriage. How did the 2 counts they get information on the branches of the Devil's Hand that hid in Langersthai? Minos couldn't figure out either, so he thought and spoke. "Bring them alive. Jude and Cordelia. Find out how the 2 got the Devil's Hand's information." Minos was the only one who knew the exact locations of the Devil's Hand's branches that were hidden in Langersthai. But 7 locations, if not all, were exposed. How did they find out? What means did they use to find out? We'll figure out when we catch them. There were plenty of ways to play with the human's feeble mind. Furthermore, Cordelia was originally one of the 2 most important targets of the attack. It was just a matter of waiting until the day of the social gathering to capture their prey at once. I'm looking forward to it. What secrets do they hide? What kind of scream will a lady born and raised finely in the 12 families have? Minos smiled brightly as he straightened his posture. As he told Baron Edgar himself, there was no option to cancel the raid. It was his duty to carry out the mission stamped by headquarters at any cost. 2 nights later, we will execute the plan as scheduled. Speaking with a little modulation in his voice, Minos looked out the window as his glass-like eyes glistened in the moonlight. Cordelia looked up at the sky. The clear night sky was full of stars, as if dimming the moonlight. However, what came out of Cordelia's mouth was not a voice of clear and pure admiration. It was a weary sigh. My legs hurt. I've been walking around all day. In the morning, they and the Order of the Blue Lion raided the branches, and in the afternoon, they met the wizards of the Red Dawn Tower. Not to mention the wizard, Cordelia, but even the trained knights, Jun and Dahlia, were exhausted. As for the other person, there's no response, it's like a corpse. Poking the shoulders of Jude, who had collapsed and seemed to have fallen dead on the balcony's bench, Cordelia giggled freely, and Jude said as he tried to stretch out. Did you fall behind? Look at you talk, you have a really foul mouth. Cordelia clicked her tongue, and Jude opened his eyes in chagrin. Hey, who has a foul mouth? It's you, Cordelia replied shamelessly, pushing away Jude's legs as she sat down at the end of the bench. I'm glad it went well, though. Yeah. The wizards of the Red Dawn Tower were more cooperative than expected. Not only did all 4 wizards we met today promise to cooperate, but they also offered to spread the word around. Is this the sweetness of money and power? The combination of things such as being a beautiful girl, her identity as the Tower Master's daughter, and lastly, the Count's wealth, all gave us more results that we could have imagined. Maybe they helped me because they were just worried. That's better then. It definitely couldn't have been that. Well, I'm sure they felt compassion for a beautiful girl's pleading, but if it wasn't for Cordelia's status and the money offered by Jude, not even one of the 4 would have responded. The wizard was a job that belonged to the social elite, so in order to move them, a corresponding price was required. What's important is that the second stage was also successful. Among the 4 wizards we persuaded today was Flame Wizard Ronin. When you choose the wizard tech tree, of Heroes 2, he is someone you'll meet at least once, and as his nickname suggests, he is a promising wizard in flame-based magic. Was he around 30 years old? It was quite a sight to see him flustered at Cordelia's pleas, as if he was weak against women. Minos handles ice and cold air, so Ronin is the best wizard against him. Strictly speaking, Minos was not a wizard. He accepted the demon into his body and became a demonic human, so he could use the different abilities he received from the demon. He's close to a battle mage. Can Ronin handle it? Well, Ronin is not the only one here. Subayua, the Blue Lion's commander, wasn't a weakling. The search operation of the Devil's Hands branches would make him be suspicious of Langestha's security, so he definitely wouldn't overlook the social gathering of the 12 families. The social gathering won't be cancelled, so he'll send a few knights on that day. The knight wasn't just a knight for no reason. Even Dahlia right now could handle more than 10 ordinary soldiers alone. Besides, there are other children from the 12 families. Rather than the children, they were talking about the escorts that would have been sent by their families. The 12 northern families weren't just the strongest in name, so they'll definitely attach talented people as escorts. Cordelia nodded at Jude's words, but she soon shook her head and said as she clenched her fist. But don't let your guard down. In the game, everyone had escorts attached to them, but in the end, the escorts were all shaken off. That's right, that's a good mindset, but don't worry too much. We knew that in the first place, so we prepared for stages 1 and 2, right? Cut the enemy's forces in half and reinforce our allies' forces. Both the first and second stages went smoothly, so it was a much better situation than the game. Okay, then let's do stage 3 now. Cordelia asked as her glistening eyes were full of expectations. It was no wonder, because Jude haven't told her what the third stage is yet. Well, that's the thing. Yes, that's what. How should I say it? The third stage is actually almost over. What's stage 3? When Cordelia became confused, Jude replied with a bitter smile. Guess it. Guess. In the original scenario, the attack itself was literally a raid, and there were a lot of Devil's Hand members, right? Oh, I think I know what you mean. You mean their target. Yes, the target of their attack. In the original story, the number of children from the 12 families that were at the social gathering were 6, including Cordelia, and the Devil's Hand targeted all 6 of them. The ultimate goal of these guys is to summon demons after all. It was only a secondary goal to kidnap the children of the 12 families and cause confusion in the north. The easiest way to summon the demon was a human sacrifice, but simply having a large number of sacrifices did not mean that a high-ranking demon will be summoned. Because the rank should match. In order to summon a high-ranking demon, it was necessary to offer a worthy sacrifice. And in terms of human sacrifices, the children from the 12 families were all appetizing prey. It's because there is, more or less, angels' blood flowing in the 12 families' blood. The nobles of Pleiades were really special beings, not just nobles in name. However, though they had the blood of angels, that was already over hundreds of years ago. The angels' blood may be diluted now, but it was still the blood of angels. Occasionally, there were people born with a strong awakening of the angels' blood because of atavism, a recurrence of traits of an ancestor, even among the 12 families' members. Their power is only half now, so they won't be able to go after all the 12 families' children just like in the game. They will focus all their power on the one person they need to secure. And we stick to that one person. Yes, that's stage 3. To weaken the enemy, to strengthen the allies, and to focus on defending the enemy's target. Those were the 3 stages. So who is it? You said it was almost over. At Cordelia's question, Jude smiled bitterly and looked at Cordelia again as he spoke. As you already know, if you consider the original development and their goal, they will target 2 people. 2 people? At this point, Cordelia finally guessed it. She let out a long sigh and said as she frowned. Cordelia and Lucas. Correct. If Jude was born with Gumjamik and Chinmujic, Cordelia was born with a clear, noble soul and the blood of a high-ranking angel. It wasn't a prominent talent like Jude's, but it was the ability to have a high endurance depending on Cordelia's development. At any rate, in terms of offerings for summoning the demon, Cordelia wins as an A-rank prize. The other is Lucas H.R. Svelga. He is a sword genius called the Jiren of H.R. Svelga and is one of the playable characters in Legend of Heroes 2. I don't like Lucas. Why? Yellow Storm had played all kinds of characters, but she had played Lucas less often. She had never written a capture strategy for him. It was more like she just saw the characters ending for the sake of being a rotten water. He's handsome. If Jude was absolutely good-looking boy, Lucas was a cool-looking man. It's not that his personality was bad, so why does she hate him? When Jude tilted his head sideways as if he was clueless, Cordelia said with pouting lips. If you play as Lucas, Cordelia becomes a demonic human. Oh, I thought I knew. Cordelia and Lucas will both be targeted by the Devil's Hand at the social gathering, but if you went the Lucas route, he'll become the main character, and Cordelia will be captured by the Devil's Hand. She was used as a sacrifice, but became a demonic human afterwards, and eventually became a demon. Because she was born with a strong angel's blood, she had become something like a fallen angel. You really like Cordelia. Because she's my favorite in Legend of Heroes 2. And now she has become her favorite character. Was Jude my favorite? I played this character the most, but I don't know if he's my favorite character. Anyway, now was the time to put aside personal likes and dislikes. Then, let's protect both. You do know that if you leave one alone and they got taken away, it will be really difficult later on, right? I know, if you chose Cordelia's route, it was really terrible because he blocked the road ahead. Just as Cordelia became a demon on the Lucas route, Lucas became the demon on the Cordelia route. And because his inborn talent for the sword itself was colossal, he became a terrifying monster. Let's protect them both. Yes, let's protect Cordelia and Lucas. Cordelia suddenly giggled, as she found it funny to say it with her own mouth. She who was Cordelia herself now was talking in the third-person perspective to protect Cordelia. And it was at that moment. Young master. Miss. Beyond the balcony window came the voices of Marja and Dahlia. It was a call that implied that they should finish their secret time together and come in now. I should go to sleep now. Yes, I think I'm going to sleep very well tonight. It's been a while since we've been to a luxurious accommodation, and we've had a hard time today. Cordelia had a little laugh at Jude's answer as she stood up and brushed the dirt off her behind, before grabbing the balcony door's handle and saying, "Now then, good night." "Yes, dream of me too." In their same exchange as usual, Cordelia smiled and raised her middle finger. She opened the balcony door, but Jude looked up the night sky for a moment instead of following her in right away. Lukas H.R. Svelga. He is the heir to the H.R. Svelga family, who is the current head of the 12 families. In Legend of Heroes 2, he and Maximilian were the two greatest heroes talented in the sword. Well, I'm looking forward to Sylvia rather than Lucas. Sylvia was an incomparably beautiful woman and belonged to the Crossbell family, one of the 12 northern families. As a man, it was in his nature to expect for an absolute beauty more than a handsome man. Fairy Queen, you were right. As I recalled the Fairy Queen's graceful smile, I heard Marge's voice again. "Young master. As I'm coming in." After taking one more look at Langestha's night view, Jude opened the balcony door and entered. In the afternoon 2 days later, the social gathering of the 12 northern families began. Hello.